Thank you to Dr. Canino, Dr. Peterson, Dr. LaPierre, and Kathleen, our online career counselor, for taking time away from their busy schedules to be here tonight to share their stories with all of you. And thank you to RJ Thayer and his online engagement students for allowing this event to be live streamed. So if you know of anyone who couldn't make it tonight, this will also be available as a recording via YouTube link that we can share. Sorry. No, you're good. All right. So you all have a packet. On the first page are the speaker bios, and then the other two documents are grad school timeline and grad school search kind of information. And those are meant to be general guidelines for you, and so those can help you generate some questions. You can use these sheets to take notes, and those are also available on our Career Services webpage. So if you lose track of it, it's online too. Okay. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and have the panelists introduce themselves. So I guess the first order is to give us a brief overview of your career and what inspired you to pursue graduate study. So
I'm going to start because
okay.
I'm the only one who doesn't have a doctorate here. Do I have to speak into this? Or? Okay, so my name is Kathleen. I'm actually originally from Canton, and I have lived all over the U.S. for the past 6 years because my husband's active duty Army, and that's super fun and takes me to many different states. It also delayed my education after my bachelor's degree by close to 6 years, and deciding that I wanted to actually pursue my own career instead of moving around the country, I moved from the community health, fitness, and nutrition field to come back to higher education. Like Katie said, I now work in the Career Services Center and also with academic advising online and sometimes in office. So I'm getting my Master's of Science in Education and Higher Education Administration online.
All right. Oh, good. Yay. Some of you know me. I'm Dr. Kelly Peterson. I got my bachelor's as a working mom. I went on then to get both my master's, or I got my bachelor's as a working mom, my master's and my PhD working full time and with a family. So I come from that point of, you can do it no matter what else is going on in your life. Usually, there's hurdles, but you can jump them. So ask me whatever you like to know. I worked for 14 years as a forensic scientist in St. Paul, Minnesota. So I came from the field to education, back to education, because I kept thinking about what can I do next? What can I learn next? How can I go back to school? So rather than paying for school, I decided the school was going to pay me. So here I
am. Hi, my name is Patrick LaPierre. I teach the full gamut of American history courses here. I have a kind of idiosyncratic, like really particular biography, so I'm going to filter a lot of that out for what's usable for you. I start off in Canada at McGill University, and then I did a master's at Concordia University, Montreal as well. In the Canadian system, you need to do a separate master's from a PhD, so I had to do a full separate master's with a thesis, and then a PhD in history at the University of Rochester. It was long, and it was interesting, and I went into it because I knew I loved history, but I was a little bit blind to what my career possibilities were. I just knew I loved history and reading and being immersed in books. And so I probably took a little longer to figure out my career path. I just sort of followed my bliss academically and then realized I need to get a job out of this and realized that teaching is really where it's at. And I knew I loved to teach as well, so it was a union of two things I liked. But we're at a tech college here, so I don't know how many of you are interested perhaps in graduate school in the liberal arts disciplines, but I can speak to those. I mean, I can't, speak with equal authority on all of them, but if you're interested in any of those, I can certainly answer your questions.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Miles Canino. I guess, the traditional student. So I was one of those rare people that knew like exactly what I wanted to do from like 10 years old. So when I was really young, I had a disease that severely affected the integrity of my left leg. And I kind of lived my whole life knowing that I would lose my leg. And that was a really good motivator. So I was strongly motivated to work in the field of rehabilitation robotics. And so that's what I did. I got my undergrad degree, my master's at Clarkson, PhD at Clarkson, and everything I specialized in was artificially intelligent prosthetic limbs that you could control with your mind, which essentially what I wanted to do was let's do something really cool and also something that'll help me. Because you have to do something that you're passionate about. Now, kind of going from that, originally I wanted to be a researcher and I wanted to work in like a national lab or for some type of tech firm that does prosthetic limbs. Unfortunately, I found out I love teaching. I really love teaching. And so I ended up an academic, and that's kind of, as you said, pursuing your bliss, and that's really what I'm passionate about. So that's how I got where I am.
This is one I get a lot in career services. What's the difference between an undergraduate degree, or bachelor's degree, and a master's or a graduate level degree, or master's or PhD? You know, how is the work level different? What are the transitions you have to make academically? Does that make sense? Anyone can.
Well, speaking from my perspective, one of the things is that it's obviously much more focused. So, went from a bachelor's degree where you're taking a smattering of a whole bunch of courses in and around the liberal arts and other places. But, you know, when you do a master's and PhD, you're really focused on history. Of course, it focuses more when you get to the PhD level, then you're focused on a certain area and a certain theme in history. So you really sort of burrow down into your discipline. And then in doing so, you do a lot of research. I know in history, and I don't know if this speaks to the other disciplines, it's very solitary. I had a cubicle, and it was, you know, it was actually a mini office, and I would go in there day after day and live with books and dusty documents. So you have to be okay with that too, a little bit in some of the liberal arts disciplines. I mean, obviously there's seminars and stuff, but when you get to the research phase, it's often quite solitary, but also very rewarding. But definitely you get deeper and a little more specific about what you study.
Being in the midst of my graduate degree, I actually find that really resonates in that even though there's a lot of work and I put in a lot of hours every week, I know that it's right because it's exactly focused in what I'm doing every class. I don't take gen ed credits anymore. Every class has to do with what I'm culminating to in a career. And even though some days I'm like, oh my gosh, I am so overwhelmed by the number of papers that I have to write, I'm still enjoying what I'm reading. I'm still enjoying what I'm writing, despite the volume of work that I have. So I find what he said to resonate very truly.
Oh, I was just going to say the level of how much effort you need to put in versus how much effort your teachers put in or your professors put in. It's you. It's about you. It really is. The graduate studies, you don't have your professor necessarily saying, don't forget, this week we have a paper due. Did you bring your book? Hey, I found this notebook in class today. Did you forget this? No, they're going to be like, you had the syllabus. I'm sorry that you didn't recognize you had a paper due. Too bad. Right? You have to drive it yourself. Right? It's a car you're driving. Nobody else is going to drive it for you. So if you have the drive, go for it. If you don't yet have the drive, maybe wait a little bit. Develop the drive.
Yeah, so to expand, everyone said really wonderful things. So with your PhD and your master's, you're becoming hyper-specialized, right? You're becoming really good at one thing. And the exciting thing about that is sometimes you can be really good at one thing that no one else has really become good at, which is fun, but it's also daunting because as Dr. LaPierre had said, it's a lonely adventure, right? There are numerous times where I went into my advisor's office and I said, hey, this happened, I don't understand. And his response would be, I don't know, man. You're becoming the expert in that field. And it's true, when you're pushing frontiers, when you're pushing boundaries, there's really no one holding you accountable but yourself. And I think it was Niels Bohr who said that to become an expert, you have to make a mistake. You could have to make every possible mistake in your field. And that's kind of how you learn. You face a lot of things where you're just like, well, this didn't work. We need to try again. And that's exciting, but it's also frustrating. So.
What are the advantages and disadvantages of going into either a master's or PhD right after undergrad or waiting, maybe going into industry or what have you?
So I dove straight in. And that was because of advice I had been given from multiple mentors who had waited. So a lot of them said that the longer you wait, the more life will get in the way. That was kind of the thing I was told a lot. So they said just dive headfirst in right now and get it done because you know what you want to go for. To give an opposite side of that, I have a best friend who kind of did the opposite thing. They went into industry. He got his master's. His company paid for him to do that, which was really cool. And now he's doing his PhD, but it's taking significantly longer. But at the same time, he probably has a much higher net worth than me because he's been working all this time, right? So there are trade-offs and there are benefits. But I do believe in what many of my mentors said, and that life will get in the way the longer you wait.
Yeah, and just to go off that, my life got in the way really early, so life was going to be in the way no matter what. But I didn't know what I wanted. What did I want to do? I wasn't completely sure, so I waited. And I always suggest if you're not completely sure, if you haven't found your passion yet, and you don't have a passion that you really want to push for, like Dr. Canino knew really early what he wanted, and that's great. But I didn't, so I waited, and I found my passion, and then I went for it. So there's really nothing wrong with either direction. It's what you have to choose. You have to, pick what's best for you.
On kind of both sides of that coin, so I did wait almost 6 years. In that time, I was accepted to and then didn't end up going to 3 different graduate programs, but it wasn't what I wanted ultimately. And being in the field and working, I kind of ruled things out over time, like, okay, this isn't what I want the rest of my life to be. And it helped refine the results of my search over time. But on the flip side of that, you lose academic momentum, so to say. I had to learn how to be a student again, and to say, as well as my job, I also have to remember to read this, write this, etc. So I think that had I gone straight in from being a student, that would have still been my norm. But after you've kind of gotten to do your thing and not have homework when you get home from work for 6 years, you have to learn how to do that again.
Yeah, so if I could just add it, the attrition rate's really high in the liberal arts discipline. So I started off with a cohort of maybe 10 in the entering class, and I was the only one that ended up getting a PhD. And it's not because I'm any smarter than anybody else. It was just that I think a lot of those students, life got in the way, other things happened. And so I was fortunate enough that I was able to carry through. But it's one of those things where you're right. You really have to want it, especially at the PhD level. I took 8 years alone just on my PhD. That's not even counting the BA and Master. So of course I was very decadent and read everything and tried. I worked harder, not smarter. And I go back and I'm like, I could have cut it down by 3 years. But it's the type of thing where you have to love it. And I will say too, that now they're telling history mentors to advise their students not to go into history and not to go to the humanities disciplines and the PhD because the job market is actually not great. In other words, that we are producing a lot more PhDs in English and history and even disciplines like political science than there are jobs. So not only do you have to want to be able to finish the PhD, but you also have to recognize that you might not get what is the gold standard of a tenure track job at the end. So it requires a very strong stomach, and requires you to weather some downs as well as get the ups and the downs together. So.
That 8 years or whatever you would do to get a master's or a PhD is a lot of years of expensive schooling. So how would you suggest pay for all of that?
Well, I'll just say that right now graduate schools are doing something they didn't do in the past, and that is they're only accepting students they can fund. Okay? So generally if you get accepted into a PhD program, I don't know if this applies to other disciplines, they'll fund you for your entire program, meaning they'll pay your tuition and give you a stipend to live. I was lucky I had a fellowship where they paid my tuition and gave me a stipend to live. I did have to eat a lot of ramen noodle sandwiches for a while, but it's not you're not living high on the hog, but they're paying you to read books. I mean, so generally if you're accepted in the PhD program in the humanities, they're giving you something, money for it.
Yeah, so similar in engineering. Engineering is, getting more competitive because industry wants people with higher degrees. So generally, if you're accepted for an engineering PhD, it's paid for. I was able to go on a teaching fellowship, which means I got all the responsibilities of a faculty member and none of the benefits. So I got to teach and advise students and do all that stuff while I was at Clarkson, but I was paid really well compared to my other graduate student peers. So that was exciting. So generally, you take home a salary, and they pay your tuition. So I haven't heard in recent times of people who are paying for their PhD.
Kind of a combination, and I have a unique situation. When I was looking, there are a plethora, kind of what they're talking about, of graduate assistantships for graduate school specifically, whether it's specifically through your school or like in the SUNY system, a lot of sister schools will list assistantships, so you shouldn't have to pay for your school as long as there are those kinds of positions available to you in your area. Like, for example, I reached out to SUNY Canton. It's not quite an assistantship, but it's within the SUNY system, and they do have a tuition reimbursement program for faculty and staff. But my unique situation, I'm a military spouse, so anybody who is related to a veteran in here possibly, VA benefits, those do transfer over to dependents of military, and if anybody needs more specific know-how on that, I do have some knowledge on that. So.
I have a question specifically for Mr. Canino. So what does Clarkson offer in terms of like finance for graduates?
Good question. So you're asking like what's their standard stipend rate like that they normally give students? So I think it's 24 to 26,000 per year. For both. So if you have an assistantship, it's a year-by-year assistantship that they reappoint, which they won't drop it. I've never seen them like give a student a year and then say, oh, unless they were getting kicked out or something like that. So it's starting rate, I believe, is 24 to 26,000 and tuition waiver. So you're not paying tuition. I believe that's their standard rate. There are also health benefits and stuff on top of that. So the effective salary is like, and they throw their tuition in. So like the effective salary is like 80,000 something, but like what you take home is $24,000 to $26,000, and you have health, dental, all that stuff as well.
If anyone's an EOP student, there's something called the SUNY Graduate Opportunity Program, and you can apply if you get into a certain, there's a list of SUNY graduate schools, they can cover your tuition. So that's on the sheet that you all have to.
To add to that, there's also a lot of institutions that give additional fellowships. So National Science Foundation, NASA, Ford, I believe, has one. There are quite a few big name scholarships and fellowships that will pay you an additional salary on top of it, give you some research funding, and also pay your advisors some money to make them happy as well. No, those are generally merit based.
What is the trade-off? So rather than going right into the work field off of your bachelor's compared to going to school for another year for the master's, what is it worth it in the end by how much more you're making? Or would you rather get that experience for 3 to 5 years somewhere and then move on to the higher level jobs?
That depends on the field. It's very depend. So you have to really study the market that you're looking to go into, right? If you want to get into a field that's very experimental, so something that's not well researched or not well understood, you need by virtue of the career you want, you need a higher level degree. So it's either you're making no money in that field or you're going to get a degree in making money in that field. Now, there are others where a master's is economically probably the best thing. There are quite a few fields that are like that. And then there are fields where you need a PhD. So, one that comes to the top of my mind is there are a few branches of nuclear engineering, right, and petroleum engineering as well, where kind of you need that specialization that you see at the PhD level to get an appreciable salary or kind of the working position that you want in those fields.
I kind of want to backtrack a little bit. Going back to the veteran, I guess you feel like fund or like veteran benefits. Does the family member have to be like a direct family member, or can it be like cousins, aunts, like any family of sorts?
Generally, you have to be a direct dependent, so I have my husband, but if we had children per se, he would be able to transfer those benefits. It has to be a pretty direct relative. I did look into my grandfather's benefits, and had he not used them, there was a possibility I would have been able to had some of that transferred over. So it kind of depends on the service members' years in service, whether they're active, reservists, whether they've used any of their benefits themselves. And my husband also has some job security thanks to me, because in order to transfer the benefits, he had to add 4 years to what he calls his sentence in the military. So it's very situationally dependent, I guess I would say, to answer your question. But easy answer, direct dependent, child or spouse.
Okay. Hi guys, I have a question. Okay, so obviously, everyone knows like for grad school there are different types of perks like networking and forming bonds and things like that. But my question to you is, would you have gone to grad school if it wasn't a possibility of you getting a salary increase? Because it does come down to money at the end of the day, besides the other perks. So like the more you go up in degree, the higher your salary might be. So if it wasn't for the salary increase, would you have honestly gone to grad school?
Go ahead.
100%. Yeah, I would. So I mean, usually you do it because, well, you should be doing it because you love it, right? You love that topic, or you're passionate about that topic, and you want to know more about it. So yeah, if someone gave me like pennies after I got my PhD, I still would have gone for it, right? That's, yeah, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I will. Believe me. Anybody who knows me knows they're getting the honest truth out of me. Yeah, I would have. I would have in a heartbeat gone. I actually took a pay cut to come from industry to teaching after I got my PhD. And my whole life has been pushing boundaries, trying not to be a statistic. I did it because I didn't honestly think I could. My whole life I thought there's no way in hell, excuse my language, I could ever finish a PhD, right? I always thought I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't. And so I did it, and I was like, oh my, you always wonder, are you sure? Is it absolutely finished? Absolutely done? Got the paper, now it's hanging in my office, and I'm like, I think somebody made a mistake. Can you check it again? Right? That's me. That's how, and I did it basically because I would never have done it if I wasn't scared to death, right? I didn't think I could, so then I challenged myself. Okay, I'm going to start. And then it was one class at a time, right? All right, one semester's over. All right, one semester's over. My PhD program had these milestones, they called it. And so it was like, all right, I'm on milestone 3. Okay, I'm on milestone 4. And it didn't matter how long each one took. As soon as I could highlight it, I have the paper still at home with each little highlight. Every class, every milestone. And by the end, I was like, oh, guess what? Look, I could do it, right? Quick side note, I was a teen parent. A lot of you guys have heard this. I was 16 when my son was born. The statistic was 80% of teen moms didn't finish high school, right? So here I sit, PhD. Like, there was no way I was going to not finish high school. Then there was no way I was not going to get at least a bachelor's degree. And then I did my master's because I could get a better salary, right? But then I was like, well, I already did the master's. Now it's just a little bit more, right? And so that's what I kind of tell both my kids and my students too, just a little bit more. Really, that's all you got to do is just a little bit more. And here we are, right? Right. So yeah, absolutely in a heartbeat. So.
I'll just say that it's almost not applicable to the liberal arts because you are unemployable unless you have a PhD. So, in other words, yeah, I mean, we're maybe, conversationalists at parties and stuff, but we're not.
I wanted to add one more thing before we go to the next question. Also, with a lot of engineering faculty, right, in a lot of fields of engineering, we take huge pay cuts to be faculty. So this is not an exaggeration. In industry, I would make 3 times or more what I make right now. So in industry pays engineers really well, especially with PhDs. But like I said, the pay isn't why we do it. It's because of what we're passionate about.
Yeah, so we have a question from an online
That's an excellent question. I would say, I mean, my advice would be to diversify, to not do it all at the same institution, because you'd be working with the same mentor. I'm not sure it would hold you back tremendously out on the job market, depending on who your mentor, what the institution is. But generally, I would say it is also better to maybe do your undergraduate at a different place than their graduate work. The institution matters, but I would say even more important than the institution is who you're going to be working with. And one thing you need to do is do research. Who is doing something that you're interested in out there? And to contact them. There are certain, I'll just give you history as an example. There are certain departments that specialize in things. And I do American intellectual history, which is the history of ideas. And the University of Rochester is one of the best in the nation at that. And so I applied to that school, and there was a number of mentors I could work with. And so some schools that were better named schools were actually not very strong in that particular sub-discipline. So it's really important not only to look at the institution in terms of its prestige or even in terms of other things, but also to look at the people who staff the department. Is there a mentor you could work with? Are they taking new students? Are they near retirement? That's another thing. It's going to take you to 4 to 5 years to do your PhD. Are they going to be retiring before? All these kinds of things factor in, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a wonderful question that kind of leads down a bunch of different rabbit holes. So diversifying is good. I think it's great because it gives you different viewpoints and you get to learn a lot of different environments. If you're going to be an academic, it's also good to see that different institutions work differently and there are different styles of politics at different institutions, and kind of knowing what you want as an academic is important. Additionally, so the idea that does the institution matter? I think it used to. I think nowadays institution doesn't matter as much. It's kind of who you are as an individual and what you've done. I think academia in general and industry as well is moving more towards a meritocracy, which is good. So we're seeing it more not resting on your laurels and what institution did you go to versus kind of what are your qualifications, what have you done, who are you as a person. And I think that's good, and I think we're seeing that. We're also seeing a lot of institutions actually get rid of the GRE as well, kind of building upon that as we're more interested in you as a human being, because getting your PhD is kind of a very human experience, which I will not get way into that. That's a mess. But I do think that it's valuable to diversify yourself. To piggyback on what Dr. LaPierre said, it's so important to actually reach out to people that you are passionate about their work. Just talking to a researcher can end up getting you in the door and get you in the lab. One of our students who wasn't able to come here today, Kimberly Collins, she actually, because she made connections with a school, now has an office with that faculty member and is working on research with them and is going to be their PhD student. So that's incredibly exciting. But it really helps to drive across, talk to these people, right? As faculty, we want to interact with you as kind of like our future students. And it's better if we know you before you apply to us. Additionally, kind of building on that, talk to the lab. So one of the big things that people always say is, should I go for an interview? Should I go tour the campus? Should I do all that stuff? Yes, 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 okay? And talk to the lab, because I don't want this to sound bad, but there are still some institutions and some labs where the faculty, the PIs are abusive, for lack of a better term, okay? And being able to talk to the students that work in those labs independently and understand how is this person as an advisor, how are they as a PI, how are they as a manager, and kind of understanding, does this person culturally fit with you, and kind of, you're in it for the long haul with this person, right? They're kind of, in a lot of ways, like an adoptive parent. Right, and I always joked about that with my advisor, but there's someone that is intellectually parenting you. So you really want to make sure that you're compatible.
Yeah, I mean, what they said. No, it does matter. And when I was researching, I talked to people not only in academics, but in the field as well. Because, I asked them, where did you go? Where would you suggest I go? You know me. What would you suggest? And it actually led down some really wonderful paths. I had a coworker give me all her textbooks. Imagine, the whole program worth of textbooks. Here you go. And she's like, when you're done with them, whatever. I sold them back, by the way. Right? Do you guys do the book sell back? Right? You should. I kept some of them. I still have my chemistry book. But, talk to people in the field. where do you want to go? Where do you want to be? They'll give you some information just like we are. They'll tell you, what worked for them because they'll be the ones that will know what the field is looking for now. Maybe they've had a bad, experience with a specific institution or a specific mentor or something that they'll be able to tell you, don't go there or you won't like that there because of this reason or what have you. But talk to people. Don't just go, oh, I know, this school's name and they have a program, but does that program fit for you? Drive your car. You're driving it. Take it where you want to go.
I'll just throw in a quick note, both as a student who recently made this decision, but also someone who's writing resumes for students such as yourselves. If sometimes the name of a university will stick out, but oftentimes you got to think about, is somebody reading this line on my resume and just seeing what my field was in, what my major was in, and paying attention to what the school was necessarily. When I was looking for the school that I wanted to go to, I was looking specifically at curriculum. I compared curriculums side by side and said, okay, what courses does this one have that this one doesn't, and what difference is that going to make? I called the department heads and had conversations, and that really ended up making my decision for me. But then another really important component was, so what if something happens with life? What offering does this course have? Can I take it online? Can I take it in person? Can I take it in a flex format? Because that, for me, was really, really important as well. So there are absolutely logistical components to that decision, as well as the resulting degree that you're going to have.
Is it more beneficial, I guess, to do a master's in person rather than online?
So you and I could. Well, my program was mostly online. We had a residency, so we met for 3 days in person at the beginning and 3 days in person at the end. So we got to know each other at the beginning, and I went through my master's as a cohort. So the same 12 people were in every single class. So we knew each other, and we knew each other quite well. Not as well as or they actually knew each other better than I thought at the end. People were on vacation, and other people were turning in each other's homeworks, and it was just a mess. But so it was, I did mine mostly online, and so I can speak to that. It depends on what you're doing, really your field. There are programs where you need to be hands-on. You probably couldn't learn engineering online without having hands-on, and you probably couldn't do that kind of stuff at home. So it depends on the field, I would say. There's a lot of stuff you can learn online. I was lucky enough to do both my master's and my PhD online, but both times I was in the city with the school, so I could legit go to the brick and mortar and say, I don't understand this assignment, and the professors were there, the staff was there if I had questions with, billing, or I could go to the law library. I still go to the law library from my alma mater for my bachelor's, because I'm used to it. But to have the, that kind of stuff available to you is helpful. But you couldn't, get books online now. So I guess it depends. What field are you thinking about going into? You don't know? Oh, okay. Well, you'll have to.
I'm leaning towards forensics.
Okay.
But I've seen programs that are like both online and in person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of for forensics specifically, some of the better ones are the in-person ones. So, but there's some that aren't terrible that are all online. But if you want any kind of hands-on work, you'd want to be at face-to-face.
So I can't speak specifically to your potential field. She'd be your lady for that. But I think that for me, I was absolutely mortified trying to go online at first because I'm very much a hands-on learner, and I was sure that I was committing myself to some sort of failure in some realm. I kind of supported myself by getting a really relevant job. So though my program is online, I am putting practice in person exactly what I'm learning in my courses in my job now. But I would definitely self-assess, like, how do you learn? Do you need to be doing something with your hands to be absorbing that information? And what kind of person are you? If you really keep to yourself and it's hard for you to connect to your virtual classmates and professors, then that might be more difficult for you than an in-person where you're kind of pushed into that environment might be. But now times are changing with you can I've Skyped to my professors, and I text my classmates all the time once you have the opportunity to meet them, so times are changing as well.
I think both are valuable. I think it depends on your major and research it. I mean, research, is this an effective program? Look at the curriculum, look at where you're going to get out of it. And that's, whatever works with your life. No one will ever fault you or shame you for pursuing and furthering your education, right? So if you're doing that in a way where online is what works for you, then go get it, right? That's awesome. That's good for you. There's no problem with that. And I don't think it's really one versus the other. I think both need to exist and both are useful.
Yeah, and I'll just add as a follow-up, especially in the criminal justice field, the fact that you're a working professional or potentially a working professional and getting your education at the same time, because I'm assuming you may work while you're getting and that's actually looked upon quite well in the field. So the fact that you're in criminal justice altogether, they would prefer that you get some experience as well as education. The mixture, the combination is really well looked upon. So online is actually what people expect. So in that specific field, it wouldn't be looked down on. It would actually, they'd be like, when did you have time to go to class? Right? How did you go to school? If you didn't say online, they would think it was weird, actually.
Going back to the topic of salary, this is kind of an open question for all of you guys. What is the best advice you guys can kind of give us as students? Because I know, personally, I have people who are doing certain majors for the simple fact that they're focused on the salary, as in I'm gonna make this much amount of money when I get out of school, and it's it's not necessarily a guarantee that they'll get that job. So while in school, what is the best route to take in terms of making the best decision for yourself? What advice could you give us on that, if that makes sense?
Okay, so a PhD in the liberal arts is a terrible financial decision. I'm going to be honest with you. There's just no way around it. You're going to, even if you have a fellowship and everything's paid for, you're not making a lot of money to the extent that you're going to be saving a lot. A lot of your, a lot of your productive years are in study. I always writing a dissertation was I just went down to my basement and created a really complicated knot in a rope, right? And I worked hard, and I came back to the world, and I'm look, and I'm who cares, right? So what happens is I think financially it's not a great decision, and I'm just speaking to the liberal arts here. It's a wonderful decision in terms of my, my well-being and my, what I love to study and what I love to read, and everything is my life and work are sort of one and the same, but salary's quite low. Most of my friends went into business-related disciplines and have paid off their homes and have, are way ahead financially than I am, but I'm also extremely happy. But I will say, liberal arts, bad financial decision. Okay?
So again, with the whole salary thing, so I actually, my degree is one of the highest paying in engineering that you can have outside of some of the petroleum industry. And with that, so I'll give you an example of an interview I went to. So I went in an interview with Company X, and one of the questions I was asked is, how do you feel about 80-hour weeks? How do you feel about 80-hour weeks? And how do you feel about traveling a lot? All right? And that's an honest to goodness question that they have. That's the kind of work that you put yourself into. I was so disheartened by the culture that I was presented at that work environment that I actually feigned ineptitude for the remainder of the interview and still received a 6-figure job offer afterwards. Okay? And that's not great. So the whole idea of salary being the thing that makes you happy, I think that's false. And if you find someone who has figured out how to make money make them happy, I would love to talk to them, because I haven't figured that out, and I haven't seen a single person in my family figure that out. So I think following what you love is more important. Whether that pays you huge fortunes, fantastic for you. If it's something that pays you pennies, then that's fine too. I think it really comes down to what you're passionate about. And a lot of the times I see friends who kind of took jobs for the salary, and they are some of the most miserable and burnt out people that I know. I actually have a friend that I will call him once a month, and he actually broke down on the phone with me about a month ago, because he is working around 90-hour weeks, and he has a child now, and he has no relationship with that child. So he's taking home a huge paycheck, but he has no life. So it's difficult.
Yeah, you have to really have the passion for it. If you can find some job that pays you really well after you get your PhD and you're passionate for it, by all means do everything you can to go after that. But like my field, criminal justice, generally does not pay a whole lot. I mean, you're a government employee most of the time. You're not going to make millions unless you maybe write a book or something. But that's just out of the, anybody can write a book. But you don't go into it for the money, my field. And you especially don't get a PhD in criminal justice for the paycheck. You really honestly have to find your passion. We've all said it up here multiple times for multiple answers, for multiple questions. And you have to honestly really want it and really be passionate about it. So if you have a passion and you can find the field where that passion fits, that's the best thing you can do. So to pick the salary that you want, I would never suggest that's the best route to go. I mean, obviously we all need to pay our bills and eat and have a place to live. But if you're going to pick just the highest salary and go for that job, it's not the best route. It should be what you're passionate about, and then fit that to a job where you can, make a decent salary. Yeah, that's just my own feelings. So I don't know what everybody.
I mean, I think that this question is a lot for big picture philosophical observation, but a question that my dad asked me a lot when I was looking for what I wanted to do was, do you want to make money, or are you looking for a lifestyle? And I found that my answer kind of tread down the middle line to an extent. I mean, I like to ski in the winter and I like to raft in the summer, and I wanted to have the option to do that. I'd like to sustain that lifestyle, so maybe having some medical benefits and dental if the school that I work for is nice, but it wasn't the cornerstone of my decision. And so I think framing that, like what kind of life do I want to have, as philosophical as that question might be, really comes into question, like Dr. Miles was saying, are you going to have children? Are you planning to be married in the future? Like, those are things that ultimately do come into the equation at the end of the day.
What I want to ask you is, so you know how like obviously high school and college are like very, very different. Once you get to college, you're like, whoa. Like, so how is graduate school versus like what we're doing now?
I mean, given I'm in a much different field, I'm more in like the social sciences and theoretical side of things, but there's, I guess, two answers to that. The volume of work, for me personally, speaking of my program, I find there's a lot more reading, and the quality and the amount of writing ends up being a lot more than I did in bachelor's. However, everything, like I said earlier, that I'm doing is something that I'm truly interested in. So I don't always notice that difference in volume, if that makes sense. So if it's something that you enjoy doing, you're not going to drag your feet through it as much as if I was trying to take a class from Dr. Miles and I am terrible at any kind of science and had to do that homework on top of my other things.
So this is a crazy complicated question because grad school is incredibly difficult, but if you love the material, it's very manageable. And so that, and then there's another layer to it is what is your advisor like? So, and you'll see a lot of people kind of nod up here. So my advisor was very much led by the philosophy of he will give you as much rope as you need to hang yourself, right? And so like he would give, and he was proud, he would boast about that. So he will give you all the freedom in the world, creative freedom, everything, and he would wait for you to make mistakes. And then that's his teachable moment, right? That's where he steps in and we have our meetings and we discuss things. I appreciated it, but there were a lot of times where I was not happy that he was my advisor because I would have liked more guidance. On the opposite side of that, my best friend had an advisor who was very much like a helicopter parent. So they were like, you need to do this, and would basically itemize everything that the student was doing. So your grad school experience, I mean, the classes are very manageable because they should be topics that you love, okay? And the classes are very different in how you do things. They're a lot more free form, I guess. They treat you with a lot more flexibility. You have tremendous expectations, but there's not really like hard set guidelines for the classes as much anymore. So that's not that bad. But you also have to look at the PhD program itself as well, because PhD programs in general are kind of like trying to take classes while jumping through flaming hoops, right? They're meant to be an obstacle course, and especially in engineering because they only want a certain amount of people getting PhDs, right? They have set numbers. So you'll go in with a certain number of people, and after 2 years, 50% of them will be gone, okay? They have things like PhD exams. They have proposal or your proposal defense, and then your dissertation defense, which is the last one. And every program's a little different in the different hoops that you have to jump through. But these hoops are literally built to just knock people out of the running, okay? And that can be in and of itself very difficult. And you need to kind of understand what is that like at the school that you're looking at and how that program works.
Yeah, I don't know if this works for other programs, but let me just tell you how it works in a PhD. Is you do 2 years of coursework. Your first 2 years are coursework. This is for history. Your coursework is like a course in an undergraduate level with a syllabus and other students in a cohort, just higher level. So more, in history, more papers, more reading. So 2 years. Their third year is just spent, at least in history, studying for your Q exam, your qualifying exam. So they give you a list of books. So we had, I think it was like 250 books, plus you got to read a bunch of textbooks. And then what you do is you get into a room with 5, 6 professors, and they just, tell me about this book. Tell me about this. Which sounds nuts, right? Well, man, that's what I love to do. I mean, I was like, that was one of my favorite times. I mean, it was just great. I love that part. And then after that, you're on your own to write your dissertation. So, I mean, on your own to an extent, your advisor's checking in with you. But so first 2 years coursework, third year you got your big exam, and you're also refining your dissertation topic. And then it's sort of an open-ended ending to the extent of how long it takes you to write your dissertation. My advisor met with me every month. How you doing? Sometimes I had nothing. Sometimes I had a chapter. And that's the way it worked. All really intimidating sounding, but again, like we've all said here, one of the things I love doing is talking about books. So really, when I got into the Q exams, like, let's talk books. So yeah, 2 years coursework, Q exams, dissertation.
PhD sounds really scary to me because I'm a graduate student still, but I'm still going to go and try to get one eventually. I will tack on, like what Dr. Miles said, graduate work is designed to be extremely manageable. I know people who are active duty Army who have completed their master's degree while they're deployed overseas, for example. So if that speaks to the ability, as long as you're set to and like we're saying, passionate about what you're doing, extremely manageable in that function.
What they said. No, it's true. It's manageable if you want it. If you really aren't sure or you're not sure you're in the right program, it's not going to be manageable. It's the same with, master's and PhD. And, every program's a little bit different. You've heard my experience was a little bit more like the helicopter parent, but I would have preferred the rope over the helicopter. I had a really great professor in my undergraduate work during my bachelor's who, if you had a question, he would look at it and go, well, what do you think? Where do you think you went wrong in that lab experiment? Oh, that wasn't right? Well, what should it have been? And he didn't tell you anything. You had to figure it out. I mean, he would make sure you got there, but that was what I preferred, and I ended up with a helicopter parent as my advisor. But it's great because you're working with mentors and people who have been through it. So it's not like you're going to another student going, what do I do now? So you have people there who want to help you. So, and guess what, guys? The same thing here. We want to help you. So, we're here to help.
So to kind of that inspired one more thing about your advisor is kind of just the relationship with your advisor is like incredibly important. Like I can't understate that. They're a person that can help you tremendously. And I have friends who like to this day, like every week they're going out and drinking with their advisor or whatever. Like that's the relationship they have. And then there are others where like we check in. Like I see mine probably once every 2 months or something and talk with him. But the nice thing is your advisor should be kind of like your champion, right? They're the person that when everything's down on the table, they're the person that's going to fight for you. You're kind of, as I said, you're their intellectual child, right? So they should be the ones that are guiding you through the process when it's really difficult. And ultimately, when it comes to you doing defense, doing all these different things, they're the person that's championing for you. And so make sure that that's the kind of advisor you're looking at. There's kind of a lot of people talk about like historically Michelangelo, right? Michelangelo was a terrible advisor. He would basically steal all of his students' work and give them none of the credit. And then, he was just not a great person. So you want to find someone, and again, it's so important to talk to their past students, talk to students in their lab, figure out how this person is and see if their personality really meshes with you.
What do all these folks need to be qualified to be competitive applicants? What should they be doing right now to prepare themselves to be successful applicants in graduate school or for graduate school?
Know what you need for your field, right? That's the biggest thing is, so if I had an engineering student come to me, I would say, make sure you're really strong in your fundamental engineering courses because you're going to have to do them again, all right? The PhD exam, no matter what school you go to for engineering, will put you through the ringer as far as your fundamental understanding of engineering principles. And if you don't ace that, you're out of the program, okay? So that is something that's really, really big. Do not really just kind of try and skate through those classes and just be like, whew, I survived that. That's never going to come back to bite me again. All right, don't do that. I see that being one of the big things. Another thing that I recommend to students, and I've been recommending this to younger and younger undergrad students, is start reading research, okay? And I know this sounds crazy, but one of the biggest things is if you have an idea of a field you're passionate about, you're interested in, start reading the current research in that field. Set up a Google Scholar. There are like tag notifications you can get, and if any publication comes out with that, you can download that publication. We have like research on campus and stuff like that that can get you those publications. Download them and read them when you have free time, okay? Some of you are going to think this sounds like vulgar or whatever, but I used to have this joke, and a mentor of mine said, if you find an interesting publication, print it out and put it next to your toilet, okay? And I know, hey, but guess what? Those papers ended up getting read, and my fiance knows a lot more about robotics now. So it does work out. But try to be topical. Try to stay on top of these fields and understand where things are going in those fields, because you may be reading publications and say, this isn't interesting anymore, but it may lead you to something that you are interested about. So I always recommend research publications. I try to get students engaged with those earlier, just because when you get into the engineering grad school, you will have to publish, right? You have to become someone who influences your field, produces publications, and does research.
Yeah, so for fields of like liberal arts, I think one of the things I would do is go to the university websites too, see the faculty roster where they list their interests. You'll get to see that certain departments in certain colleges specialize in certain fields. Some are good in African history, others in thematic rather than chronological. Great grades, GPA, really more important than the GRE than anything. And good grades in the fundamental courses in history obviously are going to be very important for history, but that obviously goes to what you were saying. But yeah, online, a lot easier to do research now. You go to the different departments, see who's teaching there, see what they're teaching, see what kind of courses they teach year after year, and you'll say, man, that's the department for me,
Ta-da! No. What they said. I shouldn't go third anymore, should I? I should go first. No, I'm kidding. What honestly though, what they said. Really know what you want. Ask questions. Read research. Get good grades. Ask people. Talk to people. Don't be afraid to talk to anybody about what you're passionate about. And of course, find your passion. Before you go to grad school, find your passion.
Come do your resume with the Ready Center. No, that, but also, so I switched fields, and I also came back from a long hiatus, so I didn't have any really recent academic work to showcase. I made myself heard. I was a pain in the butt to the people in my program. I called professors and I called potential advisors, and I made myself stick out in their mind, and that's always an option. Some people look very kindly upon that, and I really think that's what made my application stand out when it came across the table to my graduate school.
So to actually talk more on that, I have a great resource. If you want to email me, it's like a long, well-written kind of monologue about how to properly harass faculty if you want to become a grad student of theirs, and to build on that. It is good. There's a great way to do it, and that is something that works really well. So if you shoot me an email, I'll send you that article. I send it to students all the time. Another thing, so something that was brought up is GPA. And there are a lot of people who think, oh, what about that semester I really messed up, or those 2 semesters that I kind of blacked out? So maybe literally or not. A lot of people kind of always come to me like, oh, I have this black mark on my resume. So I always like to tell them, I had a student who came to me as an undergraduate researcher in their 2nd semester, sophomore year, and they had a 2.7 GPA. They're not getting into any school, or at least that's what they think. They improved to a 3.2 GPA by the time they were done. They ended up getting 2 publications with me, and they got accepted into MIT. So GPA is like cool, but seeing improvement and seeing that you're actually functionally doing things and improving as a person is something that schools really care about. A lot of these really big name schools are starting to drop a lot of the pretenses. Some of them don't even want letters of recommendation anymore. Like MIT doesn't care about some of the letters of rec anymore. They just care like, who are you? And like, tell me who you are, tell me your life journey, and tell me where you want to go. And the neat thing about that is they care to see you as a person. And that's becoming more and more common. So GPA is important, but you can have a low GPA and still be successful.
I'll go first.
Yeah. I don't want to steal.
No. First, I would suggest you talk to your current advisor, somebody who knows you as a student, so they can advise the best method for you because they know you as a student. Personally, for my master's, I went through a program that didn't have a thesis at the end, which I didn't at the time know that was unusual. But what we did have to do was put together a portfolio of our work that we had put together throughout our program, our master's program. So, really great papers we had written, any kind of hands-on work. I was doing research in the lab. I was working in a crime lab and doing research. So some of it wasn't, I never got it published, but I had written it, but it wasn't published. So I did some really interesting research with the DEA. So I put that in my portfolio. So while I didn't write the typical thesis, I did actual work. So for me, that was even better because I was doing hands-on work that was helping the field. Until the case was, some people came to me and they said, we have these root balls that we think are from marijuana plants, but we can't prove it. The DEA says we can't do anything with it. I was like, well, that's not true. Bring me the roots. And so I developed a method for extraction and testing to prove they were from marijuana plants. The DEA said it couldn't be done, but you guys, I told y'all earlier I'm up for a challenge, and right, somebody challenges me. I was like, oh, the DEA said I can't do this? Watch me, right? Nobody thought I'd graduate high school? Watch me. So, get with somebody who knows you as a student, ask what the best method they think for you is, and then ask yourself. That's my suggestion.
So I guess the pathway I took, so Clarkson University back then and a few other schools I was looking at still required that you do the master's before the PhD, and that kind of goes off of what is also standard in Canada. So they require that you do a master's, and then they kind of use that as a time to kind of feel out who you are as a person. The neat thing about being able to do it as a master's is, so normally your PhD is 2 years of kind of classes, right? So you do 2 years of classes, intensive classes, and then 2+ years of research and publishing and all that fun stuff. And so after your first year at most institutions, or your first 2 years, you have to do the qualifying exam. So that exam, whatever the program is, it's different. Usually, they ask you, what is your specialization? So for me, it's robotics. So they build up a test that one day you're testing all mathematics, and all engineering students have to take the math portion of it. And then the next day you have to do the engineering portion, which tests you on all the fundamentals. And there are some questions smattered throughout that are your specialization. So on robotics controls for me. So that, those are the big milestones, right? You do that. The first 2 years is mostly classes, and then you take that qualifying exam, and after you finish the qualifying exam, you're a PhD candidate. You're no longer a PhD student. And so we tend to see, at most institutions, around 50% of people get through into PhD candidacy. Okay? If they fail out at that point, you get your master's, and then it's generally like a courtesy master's, you go on about your way. Now, if you continue on, then you have to do a proposal defense, and the proposal defense is kind of your negotiation with your committee, which something I will recommend that a lot of people consider is be very considerate of who is on your committee, okay? Do not choose a committee that is full of people that are always in agreement with you. That's not a great thing, but also don't choose people who don't like each other. That's also a bad thing. So kind of you have to know how everyone else's works to form your committee, and be creative with your committee, because your PhD dissertation, that final document you create, should be something that you're proud of, right? That's kind of that's your breakthrough, your kind of your birth into your field, if you will. And so that's something that you should have really strong and have a robust committee. I had 2 members over what was recommended for a committee, just so I could make sure that when I finished mine, it was right. And that was because I was in such an experimental field. We didn't have a lot of people that knew a lot about it. So that's an important part of it. And that proposal defense that you build for the committee is kind of your contract with the committee of, this is the work I'm going to do. This is the expectations I'm setting for myself, and then you negotiate those with those people. It's kind of like your first defense. A lot of people say it's actually harder than your final dissertation defense. And that's kind of, this is what I'm going to do. This is the research methods I'm going to use. This is the pilot data or the previous test data I'm using to justify this experiment, and here's the outcomes. And hopefully that goes well, and they say, great, and then you finish up that work as agreed upon, and you do your PhD dissertation defense, which is your last defense, and then that's it. You're done. That's kind of like your victory lap. That's grotesquely condensing a lot of work. But that's kind of the gist of it. Now, in other countries, if you do go to other countries, there are other things. So, for instance, in the UK, you only have 4 years. Okay, so you only have 4 years for your PhD, whereas in the US, people average 5 to 6 years for their PhD. In the UK, you only have 4 years, and you have to do your Vita and all that stuff, or your Viva. I don't remember which one it is. But in the UK, you have to do something very different, which don't discount schools in the UK or in Canada or other places. It can actually be really great to get an education in other countries. So,
Yeah, I had my very first forensics professor just before I finished my PhD. He finished his PhD, which was fun. That we kind of had the same right? He came in with a master's and taught me when he had his master's, and then went through to get his PhD. But he went to school in Switzerland online. And so he periodically was going back and forth to Switzerland to have meetings with his mentor and talk about, because they were doing research along the whole way. So, yeah, the UK is a great area. I mean, there's schools all over the world you honestly could go to. You just got to know they have different, methods and different processes.
So before I ask my question, so you go to grad school to get your master's, right?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Because I just want to make sure I have the terminology. So my question is, so we spoke about going to grad school right after our bachelor's, like right after the 4 years, and we talked about, waiting it out. But what about premature? Like, for example, like this advice is personal for me. So, for example, right now I'm on track to graduate with my bachelor's in 3 years, so next year. Yeah. So my question is, what advice do you advise me to just go into it right after? Like, because right now I'm feeling burnt out. I don't want to get completely burnt out. And right now I have helicopter parents, and they're going to force me to go right after because they feel like life is going to get into the way of things. So if I'm already at school, why not just finish it? But I've worked so hard and cram studied for the 3 years. I don't want to burn myself out and then fail it. So what do I do?
Do you know what you're passionate about? Have you found your passion?
I like business.
Business? Do you know what field in business? I'm not well versed in business. I'm a government employee. Business management. All right. And that's what you're passionate about? Absolutely. Do you know what school you want to go to?
That's on my head.
So,
I don't know.
so just so you know, most business schools, so to get an MBA, or particularly if you want to look at a DBA, so a Doctor of Business Administration, you actually have to have work experience to qualify to go for those. So I think a DBA requires 4 years of work experience before you can even go for a DBA. So I would advise you to work. The kind of if you want to do something else, work in between, right? MBAs and DBAs and kind of a lot of those upper level business degrees are kind of built around people who work. So a lot of those things are built with that in mind, and they facilitate that. The nice thing about that is I think more than any other industry, most companies will cover your MBA. So I think that's something you want to research more. But from a lot of my friends who did go into business, so I was in biomedical engineering, and we always joke biomedical engineering, BME. The acronym is really business major eventually. So a lot of my friends did end up going the business route. So
Look at a program, see what the requirements are. You may have to work. So good information.
Some schools will hold your place for a year too, so they'll accept you, and you can spend that year doing whatever you need to do, and they'll hold your place. So that's another thing to think about. Deferred acceptance is sometimes the terminology they use.
So, graduate school is usually competitive. Say you have the same GPA or relevant same GPA as everybody else, you have the same, like, undergrads or whatever. How do you set yourself apart to get into grad schools against everybody else who's qualified as you are?
Go ahead. Somebody else.
Okay, so again, from the rarefied field of the liberal arts, writing sample is really important. If you have some sort of particularly good, rigorous research paper that you think is well written, that is really important. Letters of recommendation are also sort of on the outs a little bit because everybody writes a glowing recommendation for everybody now, and it's lost it's hard to distinguish people on that front. GREs are also ways that are not used as much or valued as much anymore. So for us, it's writing sample and also a connection. So if you can email a potential advisor and establish a connection, and say I'm, thinking about the school, I'm thinking about studying this, and that often can differentiate you. But things like writing sample of connection, and I will say too, whatever institution you're at, obviously you're at SUNY Can, but for if you end up doing a master's somewhere else, is the connection between your current faculty and your school you plan to go to. So, for instance, I've held some students. I went to the University of Rochester. I've held some students with the University of Rochester because I have connections. So there's all these sort of interconnected things, but yeah, that's for our fields.
I can speak for criminal justice, at least. It's a lot of what you've done outside of school. So do you have experience in the community, or maybe outside of the classroom is a better way to put it? Have you been involved in sports and clubs, and can you work with people is really what they want to look at. Nothing wrong with being a great solitary student, that's fine, but for criminal justice we have to work with people. So can you work with people well, and are you, they want to see that you're passionate about it, you've been doing it.
So it depends on the school. And again, you keep hearing us say it depends. And the American education system is so varied from school to school. They all have their own cultures and different things like that. So one of the big things that personally a lot of this comes from personal, right? So things that I would look at is your cover letter, right? There are often prompts for your letters, but that helps to differentiate you as a person, right? Because, again, GPAs are fine, but as long as I don't see, like, you failed out your last semester and you're just kind of floating on through to just not graduate or whatever, I don't know. But if I'm looking at your cover letter and it tells me who you are and that's engaging, right? That's exciting. A lot of the times, depending on the institution, faculty will actually look at graduate applications, okay? Which isn't common for undergrad applications. Usually admissions just looks at undergrad stuff and they put things through their filters and they do whatever they do, and that's how those students get accepted. But with graduate school applications, faculty will actually look. And another big thing that more and more schools are doing, which I think should be the standard, is interviews, okay? So if faculty are interested in you, if the school is interested in you, they'll invite you to come and do an interview with that school, okay? And that's valuable on both sides. One, because they get a better idea of who you are as a person, and two, you get a better idea of how that institution is as an institution. And be careful, because so this is something that I know of happening to someone, is usually the faculty that you meet with during an interview are faculty that are interested in you, okay? So keep that in mind if you go and meet with one of those faculty and they're just kind of asking like, well, how are you interested in this topic? And you're like, oh, I think that sucks, right? I know someone that did that. And they found out they did end up getting accepted to that school, and they ended up working with a different faculty there. But that faculty really wanted that student as part of their team, but the student didn't understand that connection. So know that the people who are usually meeting you at those interviews are interested in you as someone who worked for them or work in their lab. Okay, so kind of understand those people and understand kind of who you're talking to.
I second everything that has been said here. Something that you could actually do really easily online is a lot of times now graduate programs will have in their program, in the admissions or application section, an actual list of questions that you are going to complete in your application. There's a lot of, again, I have applied to programs mostly in the social and human services fields, but a lot of room for creativity in your statements. Having a well-balanced resume, so showing that you have a full life and have participated in other things that make you an interesting, well-rounded person, as well as your field. Then the interview, I agree, should be mandatory. Like I said earlier, really making yourself stand out in their mind. Start with an email, follow up with a call, schedule a meeting. If the interview isn't mandatory, those are things that all are going to make you rise to the top of the list there.
And some schools also do mandatory rotation programs. So you actually don't choose an advisor until like 1 year in, or maybe even more. So you actually get to work under different advisors kind of as you rotate throughout the program. And that can be really nice because you can get to experience the different kind of like micro cultures within that school.
Does being overqualified or overfocused like hurt you when you're looking for a job?
So this was it's weird that you bring that up. This was like a huge discussion on Twitter like a few days ago, in actually like the academic Twitter. There was a huge discussion on alt-ac or alternative academia, right? So what happens to PhDs and everyone who doesn't want to go into academia, they want to go into industry or wherever. And one of the biggest things that we hear from industry is that they don't really care about what the degree was in necessarily. Like if it's in engineering, obviously if it's like hyper specialized, right, that you need to be, they won't prefer you. But if just having a PhD shows the kind of person that you are. So it shows your drive, it shows your willingness to learn, your capacity to learn. There's a lot to be said about just having a PhD. And there's a huge amount of quality to that can't be quantified by I have a bachelor's in whatever or I have a master's in whatever. It's its own thing of there's some extra weight to that we can't value, right? And so there are a lot of times where you see people that get, so for instance, someone I know that was in biomedical engineering went the business route, right? They went the business route, went MBA, ended up getting into the medical device industry because of business, and now they're like developing medical devices. And they didn't get their PhD in medical devices or biomedical engineering. They started there, went into business, and then ended up back over there as an expert in that field. So you see people that kind of go all over the place, and the PhD can actually give you room to kind of wiggle into places where maybe you wouldn't normally have been allowed, I guess.
So you were just talking about why it might be a good idea to get a PhD, but is there any reason that you might want to get a master's instead of going for the length of a PhD?
I actually recommend almost all of my engineering students that come to me asking for grad school that they go and get a master's. So unless you're passionate about something that like you need that extra expertise, a master's is a much higher return on investment. And that's kind of indisputable, is that a master's goes a much further in giving you a better return on investment while also cutting down on the opportunity cost issues that you see with pursuing a PhD in the indefinite timeline that you can get locked up with that. So unless you have the drive and kind of that like passion to go for a PhD, I will recommend a master's.
I haven't gotten there yet. I'm currently in my master's, as you've heard, but I've heard from a lot of my superiors that research is often the differentiating factor in that. Are you wanting to go and potentially change your field or teach, and research can really contribute to that. I'm currently investigating my abilities to engage in research as a grad student, but I have heard it repeated that can, dependent on your field as well, really be what makes people decide to go on.
I was thinking it too. Research is really the difference between the master's and the PhD. I mean, besides the time and the cost and all that kind of stuff. So if you really aren't interested in doing research, master's is a much better option. I personally started doing research in my undergrad, so I just kept going. And I actually added and built on my previous research when I did my PhD. So do you want to do research? No?
So surgeons and things like that, they go through their own whole process, licensing boards, all that stuff. So they have to get their MD, which is a medical degree. They have to do residency. They have to pass boards. They have to do all this fun stuff that is a tremendous amount of time, and they are criminally underpaid. So, yeah.
Okay, so typically when you're going to your master's degree, it's only like a 2-year program, right? Past your bachelor's or past
1 to 2.
your qualifications. So what is like involved typically with getting your master's? Like I know what you were saying, to get your PhD, it's like 2 years of normal like coursework and then like more specialized stuff. But like for your master's, like what's
depends.
Yeah.
Every program is a little bit different. I think the usual route is coursework and then a thesis, right? Am I speaking out of turn, right? And I spoke earlier to the fact that I didn't do a thesis for mine. I did a portfolio of work instead of a thesis, but it varies from program to program what they're going to ask you to do. Usually coursework and then a thesis.
Yeah, there's those options. Also, speaking for history here, you can go into museum studies and other things. So, for instance, a thesis wouldn't be as good as having a second year internship and stuff like that. But yeah, the first year coursework, second year thesis, and if you are good about it, and I wasn't, you can turn your thesis into your PhD dissertation in magical ways and sort of cut down the time on research for your dissertation. So. It's not time that's sort of lost in that way. It sort of blends in a little bit to your PhD.
Yeah, that's what I did for between my master's and my PhD. I knew what I wanted to study, so every time I had an option to choose the topic for a paper, which was quite often in my graduate studies, I chose something that was related to what I wanted to study in my PhD. So when it came time to write my dissertation, rather than having to start over and gather all those research articles and past research and all that, I had it in boxes. I was all ready to go, and everybody looked at me crazy, and I was like, I've been doing this for 3 years now.
Yeah, my master's was actually the evidence I used for my PhD.
If we want to get really, really number specific, I'm taking 4 classes a semester for 3 semesters. I have an optional thesis, and then I have to complete a semester-long internship at the end of it. So in a way, it's kind of similar to how you would frame like credit hours and the number of classes that you're taking. Again, social sciences, human services side of things, but the programs will often frame it that way. In a way, if you went on the website right now, they'll block it out in a way that you would understand to read as long as you've been through a few semesters of undergrad. Okay, I have this number of classes. I can assumably get this done in 2 years if I'm taking this many classes per semester or trimester or whatever it may be.
Now another thing, so you're saying you're taking 4 classes though, which is like 12 credits?
10 credits.
10 credits? So the normal range is 9 to 12 credits for grad school, and you're like, easy, right? No, do not make that mistake. I once saw a student try to take on like 15 credits one semester, and they had a miserable time in
Part-time
grad
and
school.
full-time in undergraduate versus graduate credit translations is different. So 10 to 12 credits translates as full-time.
Yeah.
It's full-time plus in some graduate situations. And undergraduate, you're looking at 18 to 20 credits being your full-time load. So.
Right. Yeah, just be careful of that.
Okay, so do you guys know much about any type of psychology, like master's programs, or like maybe what they would have to do by chance? Because like that's what I'm interested in doing, but like I haven't had the chance to look.
So psychology goes 2 routes, right? They go the clinical practice route and more the scientific route. I can't speak to both, but I know the scientific route is very similar to a lot of the pure sciences. So it's very traditional. The clinical route, I assume, is more akin to what you would see in medicine. And those, I mean, you can do psychology and you can have a PhD in it, or you can have an MD. And it depends on how you practice and apply those things.
Okay.
Yeah, and personally, I only know about programs that are for behavioral psychology and the forensic psychology kind of. There are a lot of master's programs in behavioral forensics, they call it, or behavioral psychology, but it's more of the forensic side of things. So if you want to talk later, we can.
And just so you know, the difference is psychology and psychiatry.
Mm-hmm.
Doing research in undergrad to help set yourself apart?
She's mentioned that as well, but we've all talked a little bit about research here and there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been lucky enough to be able to do some, although it was really difficult, so I was wondering for everyone else, like, what kind of resources are available on campus for doing that?
Yeah, it depends. It really varies from department to department, mentor or faculty person to faculty person, what they're willing to do, what the opportunities are. So your best bet would be your advisor or someone in your department who you have the same interests as. And that goes for everybody, really. I mean, your faculty advisor and your professors who are doing what you like or similar to something that you like, be the first person to go to. They'll be the ones with all the opportunities that.
And let's plug the honors program, which is that you could do an honors contract and thereby get into a research relationship with the professor and you know, do something really cool that way.
Oh, yeah.
Be a great way to do it, you know.
Scholarly activities is coming up.
Scholarly activity celebration,
And
yeah.
if you ever are interested in work, but you don't feel like there's a faculty mentor that meshes with you, email me. At the very least, I can get you in contact with someone, or at least work to get you some funding or anything like that. Like Dylan, I know you struggle a lot to find a mentor on campus because you study something very specialized that no one on campus has experience with. But that's exciting. I mean, that's exciting for you, and you did very well, right? And that's remarkable and fantastic. But the school did support you at least being able to go out and pursue that, right? So at the least, we will do what we can to support you in a way that we can.
Alright, so how do you like differentiate something you're passionate about from something you want to do for a job?
Wait, there's a difference? No. I'm teasing. Go ahead, Gab.
I mean, I think a question that you can ask yourself in that is what you're interested in something you would give up other things for? Is it going to jump to the top of your priorities list ahead of other things in your life? Like I mentioned earlier, are you looking to have a particular lifestyle, or are you looking for a particular paycheck, somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, for me, it was what I was doing in my off time. So, you know, I was always reading books about skeletons and mummies and anthropological topics. And so I went the anthropology route, which led me to forensics, which is where I am. So I was searching for my passion. And when I was doing everything in my off time, I thought, well, this is what I can go to school for and do this and get paid to do this.
As a self-diagnosed workaholic, that's probably one of the most dangerous questions you can ask, because it's kind of, if you're following your passions, it's easy to like really work on that, right? And kind of like sacrifice like it's something you're willing to sacrifice, as you said down there. But there's a limit, right? So kind of know that work-life balance. And so the question is like, how do you know if it's something that you're passionate about? How do you know if it's something that you want to do as a job? One of the questions I always ask my new advisees is, what is a job you wouldn't mind waking up 6 a.m. every day for? And a lot of you up here don't think that's that remarkable, right? We have to wake up at 6 a.m. But for a lot of students, they're like, I have to wake up at 6 a.m. for something. So that can help you kind of have an idea of what are you passionate about. Okay, what's the thing that you don't mind doing that for? And kind of explore that. But also, please appreciate the work-life balance.
Oh, I just wanted to take a minute. It looks like they're wrapping. I was going to thank the online viewers, but did you already? Oh, yeah. Thanks for viewing. We appreciate it.